April 17th at City Club Commons from 6 to 7:30, we are hosting a discussion on the public policy and legislation surrounding childhood obesity. City Club continues to look at health issues, and we will have with us 4 experts from OHSU Center for the Study of Weight Regulation and Associated Disorders. It's free, but we would like you to RSVP so we know how many people we are getting, so please call Kim McCool. I want to remind you, as I did last week, that we are doing a membership drive this spring, and those of you that join between now and the end of May will get a free lunch. And those of you who are members who recruit a new member will get a free lunch. Compliments of our friend and City Club member Al Jubitz. So please consider joining and think of City Club membership as a gift for a graduate or a birthday gift or anything else. We are so fortunate in Portland to have great corporate citizens that help make these programs possible and help bring them to our radio and television audience. I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking our quarterly sponsors, Schwabe, Williamson & Wyatt, and KeyBank. Our program today is entitled Sizing Up the Portland Police Bureau with Chief of Police Rosie Sizer. Get it? Back in her 20s, Chief Sizer was on a career path to become a professor. She was in graduate school for 4 years at the University of Iowa, finishing all but her doctoral dissertation in history. And working as a teaching assistant, she found that she wasn't really all that crazy about being a professor. The last straw was being assigned to a 7 a.m. Friday morning class and discovering that neither she nor the students really wanted to be there. So what happens next? The most logical move was to return to her hometown of Portland, Oregon, to recapture the dream she had when she was 14 years old and to follow in her father's footsteps and become a police officer. Since she joined the Bureau in 1985, her career has been on a steady upward trajectory. She has moved through the ranks of sergeant at the Central Precinct, lieutenant assigned to Northeast Precinct and what is now called the Transit Police Division, captain assigned to the Detective Division, where she oversaw the 1999 Forest Park Serial Killer Task Force, and commander, where she developed communications, strategic, and tactical plans for the various street protests, including those leading up to the Iraq War. She's now been the tactical, she had been the tactical commander for hundreds of police officers in an effort to balance free speech rights with the safety of people and property. And finally, on June 22nd of 2006, Mayor Potter named her as Portland's new chief of police. Chief Sizer has been embraced by this community inside and outside the Police Bureau for the tone she has set of openness, honesty, and confidence. And after hearing of the great admiration she's earned from young girls, she was recently quoted in the Oregonian as saying, "Oh man, I better not screw up." So how's that for candor? Please welcome Chief of Police Rosie Sizer.
Thank you, and good afternoon. When I spoke with the City Club staff about speaking to you today, it was made very clear to me that I needed to talk no more than 30 minutes and to leave plenty of time for questions. I will talk no more than 30 minutes and leave plenty of time for questions, partly because I realized early in a very political job that no one ever complains if your speech is too short. I'd like to start by expressing my sincere thanks for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you today. I would also like to take the opportunity to recognize some important people in my life. Mayor Potter, who has given me an opportunity I never expected and quite frankly didn't necessarily ever intend to seek. my mother, Molly Sizer, who by her courage and grace has been my role model, my husband, Dan Noley, my best advisor, and the love of my life, my sister, Laura Holgate, who tolerated me throughout our childhood. I was the baby of the family. And Robin Teeter, the executive director of the American Leadership Forum of Oregon and the men and women of Class 21. My association with this group of fine people this year has been instrumental in providing me the courage and skills to stay on course and to do the right thing. I have served as Portland's police chief for slightly less than 1 year. While attending our annual in-service training, I received a cell phone call last April 11th from Mayor Potter, asking me if I would be willing to serve as interim chief of police. As you may recall, I was not exactly dressed for success. Nevertheless, I was appointed chief of police in July. I am quite mindful how I got the job. I realize I occupy a position in a profession that is simply a pager call away from a catastrophe. Once a catastrophe happens, I realize one of the things that generally occurs is to change the name of the chief of police. 22 years as a police officer has taught me much about the ephemeral nature of the job I currently hold. My philosophy is to do what good I can in the time I'm given. My speech today is going to be quite personal. In the last year, I've realized how warmly Portlanders respond to the idea that the chief of police is a person as well as a position. Also, I have to admit, I quite like giving what my husband calls the world according to Rosie. I feel privileged to work in a profession and in a department that I love. I am proud to be a cop. I'm proud, in particular, to be a Portland police officer, and I'm proud to be Portland's chief of police. Each of the roles I have played in the Police Bureau has been fascinating and challenging. I have been both helper and hunter. I have seen poverty, violence, and suffering. I have been assaulted. I've been spat on. I've been called names you probably wouldn't even recognize. I've been called the B word so many times, I've come to regard the title with some degree of pride and affection. I have shut down drug houses, solved major crimes, posed as a prostitute, and no, you laugh, it's true, and helped the homeless and the addicted. I have known fear, confusion, and elation. I have known success and failure, in some cases, at the very same time. In all of this, I am every Portland police officer. I am privileged to work every day with hundreds of people who can make a huge difference in people's lives, with people who care, who strive for excellence, and express their commitment to the city and each other in countless ways. Unfortunately, much of their work goes unnoticed, and therefore, I'd like to talk about a few of these people for a few moments. Officer Barb Glass. She works in the neighborhood response team at East Precinct. Barb is a ferocious investigator of identity theft crimes. Barb has arrested hundreds of individuals for crimes that are targeted against our most vulnerable citizens, ruin people's credits, and in some cases, their lives. Officers West Helfrich, Phil Blanchard, and Mike Casleo. They work the day shift in the lower East Burnside area. West and Phil have worked hard in a neighborhood in rapid transition. They are committed to ridding the neighborhood of the heroin trade and reaching out to business people and day laborers alike. Mike has been an invaluable partner of Rob Justice and now Mark Jolin of Join in helping get chronically homeless people off the street. West, Phil, and Mike have been supported in their work by Sergeant Vince Elmore, who has made his detail of officers a model of community policing in Portland. Detective Sergeants Wayne Swiller, Paul Weatheroy, and George Weatheroy. They spearheaded the multi-year effort to bring Asia Bell's killers to justice. Although Asia Bell was not involved in gangs, her alleged killers were. Gang killings are often the most difficult to solve. A culture of silence and fear of retribution conspire to thwart arrests and successful prosecutions. Wayne, Paul, and George worked doggedly over 4 years to solve the homicide case. I might add that they were more than ably assisted by Perlia Bell, Asia's mom, who worked to stir the conscience of a community. Officer Mike Stradley, he has patrolled the Northeast precincts for 20 years. Mike brings to the job an incredible sense of service and humanity that has served as a role model for dozens of police officers. He recently volunteered to design and teach a class in customer service and community policing at this year's in-service training. Mike's class is widely being hailed as the best of its kind in our training history. Lieutenant Sarah Westbrook. She's temporarily serving as the Crisis Intervention Team Coordinator and has joined with our community partners to do amazing work in revamping our CIT curriculum. Sarah's work has focused on creating bridges between police officers and persons suffering mental illness or who are otherwise in crisis. One way of doing this was to videotape Portland police officers talking about the people in their lives who suffer from mental illness, their hopes, their fears, and things that they want every police officer to know. Sarah's effort has been so successful that members of the first CIT class in February bought gift certificates for all their instructors. You have no idea how huge a feat is this, given how cheap most cops are. And Rita Drake, the non-sworn manager of the Police Bureau's budget office, with patience and grace, Rita has guided yet another police chief through the high-stakes world of the city's budget process. I am proud to serve with these fine individuals and so many like them who are doing amazing work. But enough about them. There are too many examples to give and not enough time to provide you with some information about where we are and where we're going. When I first became chief of police, I committed to 3 things that I think are critical to improving our community policing effort in Portland. 1, building better relationships between the Police Bureau and the community. Relationship building is particularly important with communities that may not traditionally have access to my organization. 2, organizing our resources to maximum impact. We do this by focusing on chronic offenders and repeat calls for service location. And 3, developing and mentoring our personnel, thus maximizing our only important resource, our people. I feel that we have accomplished much in the short span of a year. First, it all starts with having the right people in place. I have a great team of smart, hardworking, and good-hearted leaders in Assistant Chiefs Lene Berg, Rod Beard, and Brian Martinock. They have each done great work and made significant contributions within their respective branches. And more importantly, they do their jobs by working well with others. What a concept in an era of rhetoric and rancor. We have committed to having more people providing direct service to the community. As you may know, the Portland Police Bureau has lost about 100 police officers and more than 60 civilian employees over 6 years of budget bloodletting. These cuts were taken without significant and sustained efforts to restructure the organization. An unfortunate and I think unintended consequence of these decisions was to devote too much of our budget to administrative and management functions. We are reversing this trend by returning more cops to the street and more detectives to the investigation of major crimes. The last year's changes are about developing partners and engaging the community in problem solving. Each patrol officer is expected to be working on a community problem. The problems are identified by repeat calls for service and community complaints. Officers are working on projects that range from drug houses to crime prevention through environmental design in local parks. Officers are being scheduled to spend time interacting with youth in various programs throughout the city. For example, graveyard officers from East Precinct are dropping by the Lentz Boys and Girls Club before work, playing basketball and building relationships with kids who may only see police in a negative light. The Police Bureau recently signed an agreement with the Adult Community Justice to assist parole and probation officers in supervising high-risk offenders. Officers will be making weekly visits to high-risk offenders, many of them sex offenders, in a getting-to-know-you manner to make neighborhoods safer and assist our overburdened parole and probation partners. Portland police officers worked in designing youth forums with the remarkable Roy Pittman and other community leaders. These forums are occurring in alternative schools throughout the city and offer a chance for at-risk youth to have honest dialogue with police officers in a place of safety for all. We hope to migrate this program to Portland Public Schools. And with general fund monies provided by the mayor and city council to fund jail beds and drug treatment, we are working to get the most chronic of drug and drug-related property offenders out of the criminal justice system. Among this population, recidivism has been cut by 2/3. Making changes are about seizing opportunities for the organization to learn and grow. Sometimes these opportunities attend tragedies. Most recently, the tragedy involving the unintentional death of James Chasse. Because the case is still being investigated before going to the Use of Force Board for review, I will not comment on the case directly. I will, however, talk about the organizational actions that have followed in the wake of the incident. Assistant Chief Lene Berg has formed a positive and solid partnership with the various partners in the emergency medical system: Multnomah County Health, ER doctors, Multnomah County Corrections and Corrections Health, and American Medical Response. Each aspect of the system has established new procedures. These procedures are designed to better ensure the best medical decisions are being made by the best trained people with the most accurate information that can be provided to them in a timely manner. We have begun the process of providing every street officer and sergeant with crisis intervention team training. Over the next 2 years, CIT classes will be held monthly to help police officers identify where people in crisis are coming from and how best to help them. Quite frankly, I wish that over 10 years ago, when the Portland Police Bureau adopted the CIT model, we had trained each new officer hired. I think that the training would have better prepared us to deal with a crumbling mental health care system and a time today when there is virtually no place to take people in crisis where they are wanted. I feel compelled to remind folks, however, that CIT training is not magic and that we all need to manage our expectations. I think it is part of the answer, but only part. If the only significant outcome from the tragedy of James Chasse's death is CIT, it will be a travesty. Please lobby your legislator to provide funding for a subacute care facility that provides officers with an alternative to ER rooms and the Multnomah County jail system. And please lobby your your county commissioners to fund positions that will help divert the mentally ill out of the criminal justice system and into more humane and effective alternatives to corrections. And then finally, in the months following the Chasse incident, we have partnered with the Independent Police Review Division and its Citizens Review Committee to study our use of force data and to identify ways to improve our service to the community. Recommendations from the committee will be forthcoming regarding to the changes to the manner in which we collect our force data, our use of force policy, and the way we manage our employees around force issues. The changes over the last year have been about taking on tough issues. Quite frankly, the toughest issue for any cop is the issue of race. Perhaps that is because no group of people are more consistently branded with the label of racist than police officers. The label is thrown out every day on street corners throughout Portland, often by criminals who are degrading the community's quality of life. The truth is obviously much more complex. Clearly, there are various truths based upon perspective. Our goals are to develop strategies to best ensure unconscious racial bias does not factor into our decision-making, and to ensure that fear on our part, does not cause us to flinch in our commitment to providing the best police services to all our communities. And finally, I can't talk about changes without mentioning that ultimately, like many things, it's about the budget. We have taken the opportunity provided by a good economy to ask the mayor and city commissioners to restore a depleted police department. We have requested money to civilianize positions in the police bureau, further allowing us to get fully accredited police officers back on the street. Money to continue to keep all 5 precincts open until midnight, Monday through Friday. Money to restore detective positions. So, for example, our missing persons detective doesn't have an annual caseload of 3,000 cases. Money to purchase replacements for the mobile digital computers in our patrol car. Our MDCs are sadly outdated and difficult to find parts for. We hope to free officers from laboriously handwriting police reports, which is frankly embarrassing and expensive in this technologically advanced age. And money to begin the process of creating a regional training facility for fire and police agencies in Multnomah, Washington, Clackamas, and Clark counties. With luck and the support of our respective mayors and city councils, we will not begin another annual in-service training with an eviction notice from a borrowed driving track and a firing range under 4 inches of water. Those are the changes that I've brought to highlight for you today. There are many others, some less significant and some more procedural, that are designed to help officers do their job in a more effective manner. However, at the end of the day, I feel that the members of the Police Bureau are faced with infinite challenges and infinite opportunity. One of those challenges has been about restoring public trust. There is no more important issue for any police department. Over the years, I've given a lot of thought to the Police Bureau and its relationship with the community. Sometimes the relationship goes along smoothly. At other times, it's like the Police Bureau is in a bad marriage with the community with no possibility of divorce. I have often felt that the expectation of the Police Bureau, or police more generally, is that it only produces immaculate conceptions. I mean by that perfect outcomes in a Portland like Lake Wobegon, where all the men are strong, all the women good looking, and all the children above average. A nod to the OPB public out there. In a public safety sense, immaculate conception means a perfect balance of liberty and security, perfect public order with untrammeled individual rights, and absolute safety without cost and with little effort from the community. Many police officers feel this unrealistic expectation as they must be perfect in everything they do. It can be frankly unnerving, and over time can diminish one's good nature and resolve. It is a heavy burden for any police officer. It is a heavy burden for the chief of police. While I cannot deliver to you immaculate conceptions, I can deliver to you the qualities I hold most dear: fairness, honesty and transparency, and compassion. They are part of every decision I make as chief of police. Thank you for your patience, for listening to The World According to Rosie. I can expound on any part of the speech or answer any questions that you have at this time.
Thanks so much. We now will have time for questions. Our first question will be asked by the president-elect of City Club, Don Williams. Don is COO of Schwabe, Williamson, and Wyatt, one of our quarterly sponsors. Don.
Thank you very much, Rosie. At the risk of being politically incorrect, but also, I think, being practical enough to know that most people in this room, and I think a lot of people in our radio and television audience, are wondering, my question is as follows. I think you're only the second female police chief to serve Portland, and besides being the recipient of the B-word title, could you tell us how gender has affected not only your 22-year career in Portland, but especially during your role as chief?
Okay, back to The World According to Rosie. Let me take us back a little time to 1973. In 1973, the ranks of the Police Bureau in the uniform capacity was an exclusive male enclave. And women who worked the job did so in the Women's Protective Division. They did child and domestic violence cases. They were expected to have a bachelor's degree, and they were paid more poorly than their male counterparts. They also had a very limited career track. They sued and were allowed in 1973 to become patrol officers. And Lene and I were hired in the 1980s, and I think experienced a very different career than the women who came before us. And I've always felt that one of the signal achievements in the Police Bureau in the last 30 years is that I expect to retire as a woman in this organization and do so without feeling angry. Because I don't think that opportunity was afforded the women who preceded me. I have never felt disadvantaged by my gender in the job. I guess it's a bit of a mixed bag, and I never really made assumptions about why things were happening. I felt it was an asset, and I feel it's even more of an asset in the role I play today. Cops are stereotyped. I don't fit the stereotype. And I think for a city like Portland, having a chief who's not a stereotype is a very healthy thing. I feel embraced by the community, and I think part of the reason is because of my gender. I feel embraced by my organization, and I don't think it's because of my gender, but I don't feel like it's done me any harm at all. And I think in a way it offers me to display a larger range of emotion, which I think cops need. And I feel safe in doing that in a way I think a male leader may get to, what do the PR people call it, the ick factor? Because I don't think men are able to express themselves in the same way that I am. And I think that's a healthy thing, especially at this time in this city, in my profession, and in my organization. So I think that's about as completely as I can answer that question.
Joe Smith, City Club member. I want to make clear in asking this question, I am not a stalking horse for either Tom or Chris. There is a proposal to significantly change the Portland Charter. I do not ask you for your opinion on it, but what I would like, because I haven't made up my mind either, but have you assessed what, if any, significant changes you would expect at the Bureau if the proposal passes? And if you have assessed those, what might they be?
I am an open and transparent person, but I'm going to dodge that question. If only because my budget is dependent upon the votes of 5 individuals with whom I get along well and who I respect. And I don't want to get in the middle of that question, to be perfectly frank. I think it would have an effect, and it's probably, if it went through, there'd be effect that would occur over time. But the other issue that I have is I am in my public role today, and there are rules in the city about lobbying or not lobbying for measures such as this. So I predicted that one, and I was ready with my dodge.
Chief Sizer and Paul Milius, I'm a City Club member. I'm a native New Yorker, so this kind of strikes close to home. And there was an incident recently where a police officer fired 31 shots. If I imagine the scene, it was probably in less than a minute. He unloaded one magazine, plus the round in the chamber, reloaded, and unloaded another one. Can you comment, maybe I'm having you stand in for people in New York, but why does an officer on the street, not a SWAT team or any special tactics, need that level of firepower? And a second question is, what are the rules of engagement here in Portland about using that kind of fusillade in a street situation?
I'm not going to comment on the case in New York. I don't know enough about it to do. I'll give you a little bit of history of our deadly force policy and our training around the issue of deadly force. I was hired 22 years ago. The street is a more dangerous place than it was 22 years ago. It was still fairly rare that I, as a patrol officer, would encounter people with guns. It's not a rarity anymore. What happened over time is you had police officers, like myself when I was first hired, that were armed with revolvers. So six rounds and a couple set of speed loaders that you could reload with if necessary. And what came to happen is that we were faced with threats of people with semi-automatic handguns and above. And there were decisions that were made by virtually every police department throughout the country that to meet the new challenge and greater threat, you had to arm police officers more greatly than you did at one time. The individual decision to use deadly force for any police officer is bounded by law, and it's bounded by departmental policy. And the law is around the Graham standards, and it has to do with what a reasonable police officer would do in a situation. Departmental policies like our own are more restrictive than the law, but ultimately it's a factor of the totality of the circumstances, the threat to the community, the threat to the police officer, and the level of the crime. And it's a complicated mix, and I think I'm getting to your answer, but I'm not sure. What I do know is that violence in our society is represented one way on TV and movies and happens a different way on the streets. And until you see that and get your mind around it, you really have no idea. Not a deadly force issue, but when I was first hired as a police officer, one of the interview questions that was asked of me was, you're driving down the street and you see 3 police officers struggling with one suspect. What would you think? And I preface my answer, never having been a cop, was, I've never been a cop and I don't know what it takes, but that doesn't sound fair. 3 against 1? That's not fair. And then I became a police officer and I realized how difficult it is to do your job and to use force on occasion to get the job done. And I like to tell a story about a time when cover officers and I arrested a domestic violence suspect. It was a mandatory arrest situation. And the guy was kind of a burly, strong guy, and it took 8 of us, 8 police officers, to take him into custody. At one point, we were trying to break the rigidity of his torso because our training is to get people on the ground because then they don't have leverage over us. So one of the police officers was punching him in the abdomen with the end of a baton to get him to buckle over so we could take him to the ground. There were 4 officers, 2 on either arm, trying to get him in handcuffs, and he looked down at the punch to the abdomen and he says, "You're pissing me off." And he lifted his arms up, and there were 4 of us dangling from his arms. And it's like, even at the time, I felt how absurd this must look, and how absurd it was, but sometimes how much more difficult it is to actually do the work than to either view it being done or to see it in a very choreographed way. I would encourage you to avail yourself of the opportunity to go on a ride-along to kind of get a sense of what it's like for officers on the street. I think you'd find it really interesting.
B.J. Seymour, City Club member. You may remember a story in Willamette Week a few years ago about a transgendered police officer named Damon Woodcock. And Damon was fine when he was in his transition until he moved into the male locker room, in which the atmosphere was such that he felt compelled to leave the police force. I'm sure the policies are okay because there's a city ordinance prohibiting discrimination against transgendered people. But has anything been done to improve the attitudes of police officers toward transgendered people?
I think in my 22 years, we've come light years in the treatment of that area of diversity in my organization. And I have to credit Mayor Potter, when he was chief of police, for a lot of that work, because he brought it to our attention and public attention. And now within the issue of sexual orientation and gender identity, we have a very diverse workforce. It doesn't mean that everybody feels wonderful at all times, but I think generally our department is thought to be a pretty friendly police department for people who are not heterosexual. Damon Woodcock is not the only police officer who went through gender reassignment and who successfully maintained a career and promotion within our department. So,
Meredith Savory, City Club member. I was the chair of the Community Policing Study Group that issued a report several years ago. And one of the reasons that we took on this topic was that it seemed to us, after the years of Mayor Clark and Chief Potter, that the phrase community policing had just totally dropped from the lips of both police officers and politicians. I think it's come back. I heard you use it 3 times during your speech, and also heard you say community innumerable times, so I'm very glad that that has come back. My question is, one of the recommendations that we made to the Chief of Police was to meet the minority hiring targets that the mayor had set. How are you doing on that?
we could be doing better, but we're making good effort. We have a wonderful partnership with Portland Community College at the Cascadia campus and are actively recruiting. But it's tough. I mean, it is frankly tough. It's tough to hire at all in this economy. It's tough to find applicants who can pass our screening process. And it's even tougher to find minorities who both want the job and can make the hiring standards. I'm totally committed in the next year to looking at both our standards and our process to make it that we can open the net wider, especially around the issue of education. But then we also refine our process so we are more efficient and we're faster and we don't lose people to other careers and other police departments. And then at the end of the day, if someone doesn't pass a background, I think we need to give them more information why, especially minority applicants, because I think the history has been a suspicion about whether we really want to diversify, and if we don't tell folks why they didn't make it, there's just a perpetuation of the assumption that they were screened out because of race, gender, sexual orientation. So I think we can do better, and we are trying.
Irvin Mandel, City Club member. In your speech, you briefly alluded to the need for a regional training facility, and you pointed out that the Bureau now is on a beg, borrow, steal almost for training in firearms handling, but in addition, you lost the ability for part of the 40-hour training to do driving training up there. And from what I've heard, this year's training in driving takes place in a classroom. Given the fact that the City Council is sitting on about $35 million in surplus, how is the negotiation for a regional training facility coming along?
I am very hopeful, and I'm more hopeful than I've been in 22 years. We've needed a training facility for a long time. We do kind of beg, borrow. We don't steal, but we beg and borrow a lot and buy. And we're in the same plight that all of our regional partners are as well. The things that are most critical for the public safety agencies are have the ability to have access to a range, but even more than that, a driving track. And they are difficult commodities. When our in-service training started on the 8th of January, we had gotten an eviction notice from the port. We had been graciously offered a facility there for 8 years free, and but they were going to sell the facility. And so I felt like I have to hand my in-service sergeant who coordinates the training a procurement card so she could go to Toys R Us and we could get little dashboard simulators. Fortunately, the Port of Portland has come through with another space of asphalt that we'll be able to drive on shortly, but it's no long-term solution. I think there's momentum, and I think while the economy is good, and hopefully if the community is in a buying mood, that we'll get to a place where we will have a dedicated, integrated, useful training facility within the next few years. We've had strong support from Mayor Potter. He's been in communication with city commissioners and mayors throughout the region, and we're going through the process of putting together a business plan and a governance model of how we would join with our partners in this endeavor, and I'm wildly optimistic and very hopeful.
City Club member Dave Lister. Chief Sizer, would you share with us, please, your views on the drug and prostitution exclusion zones, whether you feel they're effective and whether you support their renewal?
Yes, I would be happy to. I was a sergeant in Old Town in 1992. I feel like I keep giving history lessons. You'll understand why from the bio. But I was a sergeant in Old Town in 1992, and in Old Town, in Washington Park, and then in various neighborhoods throughout the city, we were faced with a drug dealing epidemic. And there was incredible frustration from residents, from business owners, from social service providers about what they were faced on the street every day. And so a group of smart people got together, including my husband, and developed this concept of a drug-free zone. And it was politically risky, but it was adopted, and it has been modified over 15 years for better ensuring due process and individual rights. It has been a useful tool. I would hate to lose it. I would particularly hate to lose it at the legislature. I fear if we lose it at the legislature, there would be a time where we really want it back because we really need it back. And I think that discussion needs to happen at City Council, not in Salem. On the other hand, when we talk about this perfect balance of liberty and security, there's nothing like the drug-free zone to excite that debate between individual rights and community safety and community livability. It is tough stuff. I think it has its purpose, but I frankly am not sure that if neighborhoods don't want it, that I want to insist that they have it. But I would like that discussion to happen in City Council and have answers more immediately in City Council and not at the legislature.
Andrew Wheeler. Recently in Washington, D.C., an appeals court disagreed with the Second Amendment that we've been living by with 80 years, Supreme Court decision, and they wanted to overturn that to say that individuals would have the right to bear arms. There is that sort of clause, militia and individuals. And then Lawrence Tribe of Harvard thinks that that is a reasonable interpretation. And if a more conservative Supreme Court agrees with Lawrence Tribe in the appeals court, what might that mean for policing in our country?
I really don't have any idea what you just asked.
Well, the right to bear, of individuals to bear arms, which they don't presently have by virtue of the Constitution.
Okay,
And that maybe will be overthrown, and it presently has been in Washington, D.C.
there's nothing like gun control to stir one's blood and elicit strong opinions. I think I'm like most cops and favor some limitations on individual right to bear arms. This state, many years ago, decided to adopt rules around concealed weapons permits that made Multnomah County go from just a handful of concealed weapons permits to thousands. It has not had tragic consequences, but I think most cops would rather face fewer guns on the street. They'd rather not face guns themselves. They would not favor parents who do not deal with their guns responsibly, and then their kids have access to the guns with tragic consequences. So it's another question of liberty and security. I'd just like to see fewer guns on the street and fewer guns in the hands of criminals. And I think it's complicated beyond that point.
Claire Corwin-Kradowski, City Club member. I live off Barber Boulevard, and there are a lot of adult shops on Barber, and I wonder if this is one of the zones you're talking about, and are there restrictions?
As you probably know, the state of Oregon has a very expansive interpretation of freedom of speech, and adult-oriented businesses are afforded free speech protections. And so even though for a neighborhood residents, the business may not be welcome, attractive, or wanted. But that is those decisions that are made in the courts at a level a lot higher than I. But I can really understand people's frustration about the crimes that sometimes occur around them and the image it projects of the neighborhood and to children in the neighborhood.
Melody Rose, City Club member. Thanks for being here, Chief Sizer. It's nice to hear from you. My question is about retirement benefits. There's an article in today's paper that suggests the state legislature may take action and propose some changes to retirement benefits for the police officers. And I just wonder if you could comment on the retirement system as it exists today and whether you think there's any change needed to that system.
Well, as you know, there was just a big change to the system. And I think a lot of people came together, including the community, in the process of reforming the Portland Fire and Police Pension Fund. For one thing, for many years, for my father's whole career and my husband's whole career and most of mine, the system was unfunded. And the decision that was made by the voters recently was to fund the decision. And I think that the system, and I think that was made wise economic sense. I think that the changes of the board composition were also a very good idea. I was a former board member of the FPD&R board. I did not want that job. I don't want to know detailed medical information about my employees, and I think I was placed in a position that I shouldn't have been placed in. And so now we have a new board to oversee the higher level decision making, and then a professional hearings officer to hear medical claims. And I think that's entirely appropriate. And I think one of the things that's going to be beneficial to both the community and the police officers and firefighters is this system will be depoliticized. And I think what happened over time, first to the advantage of members, and I think later really to the detriment of members, it became imbued with politics. And I don't think it's a good place for those kinds of decisions to be made. So I have every confidence that the details of the system are going to be worked out to good effect by responsible and good people, and I think the changes were overdue and welcome.
Brian Stimson, Scanner newspaper. Are there any realistic policy changes or other changes that can be made at the police department that can reduce the disproportionate stop and arrest rate of African Americans?
We are engaged in a racial profiling commission or committee, as you may know. Last fall, I went to City Council with Joanne Bowman and Alejandro Corral, who had organized listening sessions around the issue of racial profiling and our stop data collection. And out of those sessions and that collaboration and the work of City Council, there was developed a committee to look at how we can make progress on the issue of racial profiling or bias-based policing over time. I think there's good work to be done, but I think the issue is often, as I said in my speech, kind of miscast and oversimplified. As you know, the issue of race is a hard issue for all of us in American society, and I think we can do much in the way of training and providing opportunities for officers to learn more about the neighborhoods they patrol, to good impact on all of our communities. On the other hand, we put more of our police officers in neighborhoods that have high crime rate, that have high calls for service, that have high gang activities, and unfortunately, those are often low income areas and areas that are homes to disproportionate numbers of minority because of all of American history. And so the numbers don't favor us, but I don't think the numbers in itself, when you look at stop data collection and residential population, really tell the whole story. Because often the poorest, the most oppressed, are also the victims of the most violence and the most crime. And so our question is, how do we deliver those policing services that the communities want, that minority communities want, without driving up the numbers and without doing it in a biased manner? So it's very complex. We'll be talking about this over coming months. And I think there's things that we can do and there's things that the community can do as well. I think probably the thing that holds the most promise and would be very helpful is when we hire police officers, we give them a history lesson. Because many of our police officers are 23 or 24 years old, they're white, they come from middle-class backgrounds, and they have no idea of the issue of race as it feels to be not a Caucasian, and no idea of the history of the police department and minority communities. And things will be thrown at them when they patrol neighborhoods that the response can be pretty defensive just because I wasn't even born when that happened. How is that about me? I think at the very least, we need to orient them in the history and the feelings so we can not repeat it.
Sorry to say we're out of time. On behalf of the City Club of Portland, I'd like to thank you all for being here today. I'd like to thank our radio and television audience for your interest in City Club and ask you to all join me in thanking Chief Sizer for a wonderful presentation. We are adjourned.